Letting go sounds simple when people talk about it. Just let go, they say, as if it were a switch you could turn off with a single thought. But if letting go were easy, you would have done it already. You would have let go of the memory that still visits you at night. You would have let go of the person who is no longer part of your life, yet still lives in your mind. You would have let go of the fear that something important might slip away again. So why does letting go feel so hard? This is the question most people never slow down enough to ask. Instead, they blame themselves. They think they are weak. They think they are too emotional, too attached, too broken. But Stoicism offers a quieter explanation. Letting go feels hard not because you are weak, but because the human mind was never designed to release things easily. It was designed to cling, to protect, to hold on to what once felt safe. When you hold on, you believe you are preserving something: control, security, meaning. But often, you are only preserving pain. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology put words to it. They observed that suffering does not come from loss itself, but from the resistance to loss, from the inner refusal to accept that something has already changed. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself that everything you love is already on loan. Not to make life feel cold, but to make the heart wiser. Because when you believe something belongs to you forever, fear begins the moment you sense it might leave. Letting go feels hard because it feels like dying to a version of yourself. The version that believed things would stay the same. The version that built its identity around what it held: a role, a relationship, a future you imagined. When those things loosen their grip on reality, the mind tightens its grip on memory. You replay moments. You negotiate with the past. You ask what you could have done differently. This is not healing. This is attachment trying to survive. Stoicism does not ask you to stop caring. It asks you to see clearly, to understand that clinging is not love. It is fear disguised as devotion. Epictetus taught that we suffer because we confuse what is ours with what was never ours to control. People, outcomes, time, even the way life unfolds. When you try to hold what does not belong to you, tension becomes constant. The mind never rests. The heart never softens. Letting go feels hard because it threatens the illusion of control. And the illusion of control feels comforting, even when it hurts. Most people would rather suffer in familiar pain than step into unfamiliar peace. Stoicism begins at this uncomfortable truth. That peace does not come from holding tighter, but from loosening the grip. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, honestly, with awareness. Before the Stoic learns how to let go, he first learns why he is holding on. And that is where the real work begins. The reason letting go feels so difficult is not found in the event itself. It is found in the way the mind relates to what it once depended on. The Stoics observed that the human mind forms attachments long before it forms understanding. We attach first, then we explain later. This is why loss feels sudden, even when it has been approaching quietly for a long time. Attachment begins as protection. You hold on because something once brought comfort, safety, stability, a sense of identity. Over time, the mind confuses comfort with necessity. What was once appreciated becomes required. What was once enjoyed becomes feared to lose. This is where letting go becomes painful. Stoicism teaches that the mind does not suffer because something leaves. It suffers because it believes it cannot function without what has left. Epictetus explained this by pointing to the difference between use and dependence. You may use something. You may value it, but the moment your peace depends on it, you have given it power over you. Letting go feels hard because it feels like removing a support the mind has been leaning on, even if that support has already weakened, even if it has already cracked. The Stoics understood that attachment is rooted in fear of instability. The mind wants the world to stay predictable. It wants people to remain consistent. It wants outcomes to follow plans. But reality does not obey these preferences. When reality shifts, the mind reacts by tightening. It holds memories tighter. It clings to expectations harder. It resists what is already happening. This resistance is experienced as pain. Stoicism does not describe this as failure. It describes it as a misunderstanding of control. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that everything external exists beyond command. People change. Circumstances move. Time passes. When you demand permanence from temporary things, you create inner conflict. The mind argues with reality, and reality always wins. Letting go feels hard because it forces you to face this imbalance. It exposes how much of your inner stability was placed outside yourself. The Stoic approach does not begin by forcing release. It begins by restoring order. First, the Stoic learns to identify what belongs to him, his judgments, his choices, his values. Then he learns to identify what does not. Other people, outcomes, the past, the future. When these categories are confused, suffering grows. Most people attempt to let go by suppressing emotion. They tell themselves to move on. They distract. They numb. Stoicism takes a different path. It allows emotion to arise, but it removes false conclusions. Sadness may appear, but it does not mean something has gone wrong. Fear may surface, but it does not mean danger is present. Longing may remain, but it does not require obedience. The Stoic learns to sit with discomfort without negotiating with it. He does not promise himself relief if he just holds on a little longer. He does not punish himself for still caring. He simply observes. Over time, the mind learns that it can remain intact even without what it lost. This realization is quiet but powerful. Letting go then becomes less about loss and more about rebalancing. Energy returns inward. Attention moves back to what can be shaped: character, conduct, response. The Stoics did not believe letting go meant becoming detached from life. They believed it meant becoming detached from illusion, the illusion that happiness depends on conditions, the illusion that peace must be protected by control, the illusion that holding tighter will stop change. Letting go feels hard because it asks you to release these illusions, and illusions often feel safer than truth. But once they loosen, something steadier remains. Not emptiness, not indifference, but a quieter strength. The Stoic does not let go to feel better immediately. He lets go to live in alignment with reality. And when the mind stops fighting what cannot be held, calm begins to return, not as relief, but as stability. Letting go does not happen in thought alone. It is tested in real moments when emotion rises and the body reacts before reason can speak. The Stoics understood that the mind does not change through ideas, but through practice. Knowing why you cling is important. Learning how to release is something else entirely. In daily life, letting go often begins with interruption, a pause, a moment where you notice the impulse to hold tighter. Someone does not respond the way you hoped. An outcome turns against you. A memory surfaces without invitation. In that moment, the mind reaches automatically. It wants reassurance. It wants certainty. It wants to return things to how they were. The Stoic does not condemn this impulse. He recognizes it. This recognition is the first practice. To see the movement of attachment as it happens, without immediately following it. Instead of asking, "How do I make this stop?" the Stoic asks, "What is actually under my control right now?" Often, the answer is simple. Your breath, your posture, your next word, your next action. Letting go begins not with release, but with restraint. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to step back from impressions, not to deny them, but to test them. When emotion arises, the Stoic does not say, "This should not be happening." He says, "This is happening. Now how will I respond?" This shift is subtle, but decisive. Another Stoic practice is reducing the story. Attachment feeds on narrative. It repeats what was lost, what should have happened, what might still be recovered. The Stoic cuts the story down to fact. This happened. This feeling is present. No conclusion is required yet. By doing this, the mind loosens its grip without force. Letting go also requires patience with discomfort. Most people hold on because they believe release will create emptiness, loneliness, meaninglessness. The Stoics learned that discomfort is not collapse. It is a passage. When you stop feeding attachment, discomfort rises briefly. Then it settles. The Stoic allows this settling to occur without interference. Another daily practice is remembering impermanence. Not occasionally, not intellectually, but repeatedly. Everything you encounter is temporary. Every role you occupy will change. Every bond will transform. This reminder is not meant to drain life of joy. It is meant to keep joy from becoming possession. When you expect change, letting go feels less like betrayal and more like continuity. The Stoics also practice shifting attention toward character. When something external begins to loosen, attention returns inward. How will I act now? How will I speak? How will I carry myself in this moment? This focus grounds the mind. You may not control what is leaving, but you control how you remain. Letting go in Stoicism is not dramatic. There is no final moment of release. No emotional declaration. It happens quietly, in repeated choices not to rehearse the past, not to chase reassurance, not to build identity around what is already changing. Some days, attachment returns stronger. The Stoic expects this. He does not see it as failure. Practice is not linear. It is cumulative. Each time you notice attachment and do not obey it, its hold weakens slightly. Over time, the mind learns that it does not need to cling in order to survive. Letting go then becomes less of an action and more of a condition, a natural loosening. The Stoic does not force himself to detach. He simply stops feeding what no longer serves, and slowly, without violence, the grip softens. What remains is not loss. It is space. Space for clarity. Space for presence. Space for a calmer way of being. This is how Stoics let go. Not by pushing life away, but by standing firmly as it moves. Letting go becomes even harder when it is approached the wrong way. The Stoics understood that many people struggle not because release is impossible, but because they are trying to let go in ways that create more tension instead of less. One common mistake is trying to force detachment. People tell themselves they should no longer care. They judge their feelings. They demand emotional silence. This approach turns letting go into a battle, and every battle strengthens the very thing it tries to defeat. Stoicism never taught emotional suppression. It taught emotional understanding. When you fight feeling, you give it more attention. When you deny attachment, you tighten it. The Stoic allows emotion to exist without granting it authority. He does not rush to remove it. He lets it pass through awareness. Another mistake is confusing letting go with rejection of the past. Some people believe that to let go, they must erase memory. They avoid reminders. They rewrite history. They pretend something never mattered. The Stoics did not practice forgetting. They practiced right relationship with memory. What happened remains part of life, but it does not get to decide the present. Letting go does not mean the past disappears. It means the past stops ruling. Another error is waiting for emotional readiness. Many people say they will let go when they feel ready, when it hurts less, when clarity arrives. The Stoics knew that readiness rarely comes first. Action comes first. They did not wait for calm to act calmly. They acted calmly in order to cultivate calm. Letting go is not a moment. It is a posture. Another subtle mistake is attaching to the idea of letting go itself. People turn release into a goal. They measure progress. They become frustrated when attachment returns. This creates a new form of clinging to progress, clinging to an image of how one should feel. The Stoic avoids this by focusing on conduct rather than outcome. He asks whether his response is reasonable now, not whether he feels fully free. Freedom is not a feeling. It is a way of relating to experience. There is also the mistake of letting go selectively. People try to release pain while holding on to comfort. They want peace without surrender, security without acceptance. Stoicism teaches that selective release does not work. Reality must be met as a whole. You cannot let go of loss while clinging to control. You cannot release fear while demanding certainty. The Stoic practices consistency. He applies the same principle to all externals, pleasure and pain, gain and loss. Another obstacle is mistaking passivity for acceptance. Some believe letting go means doing nothing, enduring silently, withdrawing from life. This is not Stoicism. This is resignation. The Stoic remains active. He engages fully with what is within his control. He speaks when reason calls for speech. He acts when virtue requires action. Letting go applies only to what is not yours to command. It never applies to character. One of the most damaging mistakes is using letting go as avoidance. People say they have let go, but they have only numbed themselves. They distract. They stay busy. They avoid stillness. The Stoics valued stillness because it reveals truth. Avoidance delays learning. It does not dissolve attachment. Letting go requires presence. It requires seeing clearly what the mind is doing. Another challenge arises when identity is involved. Letting go feels threatening when attachment is tied to who you believe you are. A role, a label, a story about your life. The Stoics addressed this by redefining identity. You are not what you possess. You are not what happens to you. You are the faculty that chooses. When identity rests on choice and character, letting go becomes safer because you do not disappear when circumstances change. The Stoics also warned against rushing the process. They knew that attachment loosens gradually. Expecting immediate release leads to disappointment. They practiced patience not as delay, but as trust in the process. Every time you respond without clinging, something shifts. Not dramatically, not visibly, but steadily. Letting go fails when it is treated as a dramatic transformation. It succeeds when it is treated as daily alignment. The Stoic does not ask, "Have I let go yet?" He asks, "Am I acting in accordance with reality now?" This question removes pressure. It brings attention back to the present. Another important correction is understanding that letting go does not mean losing meaning. People fear that if they release attachment, life will feel empty. The Stoics believed the opposite. Meaning increases when it is no longer chained to outcome. When you stop clinging to how things must be, you become more available to how they are. Letting go then becomes a form of respect. Respect for reality, respect for change, respect for yourself. The Stoic does not let go to escape pain. He lets go to stop adding pain where none is required. When mistakes are avoided and understanding deepens, release becomes quieter, less emotional, more natural. What remains is not distance from life, but intimacy without fear. This is the Stoic correction, letting go not as loss, but as clarity. There comes a quiet shift when letting go is no longer something you actively try to do. It begins to happen on its own, not because you forced it, but because the mind has learned a new way to stand. The Stoics understood this stage well. They knew that after long practice, release stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like balance. At this point, you no longer measure your progress by how little you feel. You measure it by how steadily you live. You still remember, you still care, but you no longer collapse when thoughts arise. Letting go becomes visible in small moments. You notice that a memory appears and you do not follow it. A feeling surfaces and you allow it to pass without argument. An outcome disappoints you, and you respond without bitterness. This is not indifference. It is maturity. The Stoics believed that the mind becomes free not when it stops experiencing attachment, but when attachment stops directing action. You may still feel a pull toward what was lost, but that pull no longer determines how you speak, how you decide, or how you treat yourself. At this stage, attention naturally returns to the present, not as effort, but as habit. You begin to notice what is here now. The task in front of you, the person you are speaking with, the choice you are about to make. The mind is no longer divided between what is happening and what should have happened. This is where life starts to feel lighter, even if circumstances remain heavy. The Stoics described this as alignment. Inner life begins to match reality instead of fighting it. You no longer demand that events justify your peace. Peace comes from acting in accordance with your principles, regardless of outcome. Another sign of integration is reduced urgency. You stop rushing to resolve every feeling. You stop seeking immediate closure. You trust that clarity comes from steady conduct, not from emotional conclusions. The Stoics valued patience here, not passive waiting, but patient engagement. You continue to show up. You continue to act with care. You continue to choose restraint where impulse once ruled. Over time, attachment loses its urgency. It no longer feels like a threat. It becomes a signal that passes through awareness and fades. This is where many people are surprised. They expect letting go to feel empty. Instead, it feels spacious. When attachment loosens, energy returns. Not dramatic energy, but quiet availability. You are more present in conversations, more focused in work, more at ease in silence. The Stoics believed this was the natural result of reclaiming what always belonged to you: attention, judgment, and choice. Another change occurs in how you relate to others. When you stop clinging, expectations soften. You no longer demand that people behave a certain way to protect your peace. You allow them to be as they are without surrendering your standards. This creates healthier distance without coldness. Letting go also changes how you experience uncertainty. Instead of treating it as danger, you begin to treat it as condition. Life no longer needs to promise stability in order to be livable. The Stoic accepts that uncertainty is not an interruption of life. It is part of it. At this stage, letting go becomes less about release and more about trust. Trust in your capacity to respond. Trust in your ability to endure discomfort without collapse. You no longer need guarantees. You no longer negotiate with the future. You meet what comes one moment at a time. The Stoics did not describe this as happiness. They described it as freedom. Freedom from inner conflict. Freedom from compulsive attachment. Freedom from the need to control what cannot be controlled. This freedom is quiet. It does not announce itself. Others may not notice it at all, but you feel it in how you breathe, in how you sleep, in how you recover after disappointment. Letting go, at this point, is no longer something you think about. It is reflected in how you live. You still engage with life fully. You still commit. You still invest effort. But you no longer confuse engagement with possession. The Stoics believed this was the healthiest way to be human. Present without clinging, committed without fear. When letting go becomes natural, life does not become perfect. It becomes workable. You stop asking life to be different. You start asking yourself how to meet it well. And this is where Stoic practice quietly fulfills its purpose, not by removing pain, but by removing the struggle against what is already here. There is a moment that arrives quietly, often unnoticed, when you realize that letting go no longer frightens you the way it once did. Not because everything has been resolved, and not because life has become gentle, but because you have learned how to remain steady within uncertainty. This is where the Stoic understanding of letting go comes to rest. You no longer ask yourself whether you have fully released the past. You no longer measure how attached you are, or how detached you should be. Those questions lose their urgency. Instead, your attention turns to something simpler: how you are living now, how you are meeting what is in front of you. The Stoics believed that a life well lived is not one without attachment, but one without inner conflict. Conflict arises when you demand that reality obey your preferences. Peace begins when you stop making that demand. Letting go, at its deepest level, is not about losing something. It is about returning ownership of what was never truly yours. People, outcomes, time, Even the version of life you once imagined, when you stop trying to possess these things, something subtle changes. Your energy is no longer scattered. Your mind no longer negotiates endlessly with what cannot be changed. You become quieter inside. This quiet is not emptiness. It is clarity. You begin to see that much of what you feared losing was already unstable, and much of what truly matters was never at risk. Your capacity to choose wisely, your ability to act with dignity, your willingness to meet life honestly. These remain. The Stoics often reminded themselves that the world does not owe them comfort, but they also reminded themselves that they do not owe the world their inner peace. This balance is at the heart of Stoic letting go. You engage fully with life. You care. You commit. You try. But you do not tie your sense of worth to results you cannot control. When something leaves, you feel it. You do not pretend otherwise, but you do not follow it into despair. You allow grief to pass. You allow disappointment to soften. You allow change to complete its movement. Letting go becomes an act of respect. Respect for reality as it is. Respect for yourself as you are. The Stoic does not cling to the idea that life must make sense at every moment. He accepts that understanding often arrives after acceptance. This acceptance is not passive. It is grounded. You still set direction. You still choose values. You still shape your conduct. But you no longer require certainty to proceed. One of the most important realizations at this stage is that letting go does not make you smaller. It makes you more resilient. When you stop caring what does not belong to you, you move more freely. You respond more clearly. You recover more quickly. Life continues to change. Relationships evolve. Circumstances shift. Plans dissolve and reform. None of this stops. What stops is the inner struggle. The Stoics did not promise happiness as constant pleasure. They offered something steadier, a mind that does not panic when things change, a heart that does not harden when things are lost, a character that remains intact regardless of outcome. This is the freedom Stoicism points toward, not freedom from pain, but freedom from unnecessary suffering, not freedom from attachment, but freedom from bondage to it. Letting go, in the Stoic sense, is not a final act. It is a way of relating to life, again and again. Each day, you release what does not serve. Each day, you return to what remains. Choice, responsibility, presence. You do not need to force this process. You only need to stop resisting it. When you do, you find that letting go is not something you lose. It is something you gain. You gain steadiness. You gain perspective. You gain the ability to walk forward without dragging the past behind you. This is how Stoics let go. Not by closing the heart, but by strengthening it. Not by turning away from life, but by standing firmly within it. And when you live this way, letting go no longer feels like an ending. It feels like space.